As is the case in most countries, South Africa's past is characterized by controversy, strife and ideological conflict. In the preamble of the South African Constitution of 1996, recognition was given to the complexities of the past by stating, "We, the people of South Africa, recognize the injustices of our past, honor those who suffered for justice and freedom in our land, respect those who have worked to build and develop our country, and believe that South Africa belongs to all who live in it, united in our diversity." This sentiment was often echoed by the late President Nelson Mandela, for example, when he warned against the unconsidered removal of statues of Afrikaner icons. "We must be able to channel our anger without doing injustices to other communities," he said. "Some of their heroes may be villains to us, and some of our heroes may be villains to them." Legislation was revised to ensure that all South African heritage resources would henceforth be protected. To give effect to this, the South African Heritage Resources Agency, provincial bodies, local organizations, as well as committees such as the South African Geographical Names Council were established through legislation such as the South African Geographical Names Council Act of 1998 and the National Heritage Act of 1999. In practice, however, the heritage resources of South African minorities in general are under severe threat. In some cases, due to benevolent neglect, in other cases to malignant attack, as the following examples illustrate. The national anthem. The South African national anthem is a symbolic demonstration of the ability of South Africans to compromise in the interests of unity, as it combines 5 of the country's official languages and 2 songs, namely the pre-1994 anthem, Die Stem or The Call in English, and Nkosi Sikelel' Afrika, or in English, God Bless Africa, a hymn traditionally sung at anti-apartheid rallies and gatherings. However, the EFF, a political party in South Africa, has since 2014 been demanding that the Afrikaans verse should be removed as it represents a white supremacist consciousness. An often used excuse is quoted to justify this demand, namely that the call is not a rejection of Afrikaners, but merely an effort to relegate apartheid heritage to the non-public spaces. The fact is completely disregarded that the old anthem dates back as far as 1921 and had been the country's anthem years before the inception of the apartheid era. The authorities and ruling ANC usually sidestep the issue and do not condemn these calls to abandon an imaginative compromise that has even won international recognition. Scapegoating by distorting historical facts and criminalizing European forebears, senior South African politicians and representatives, from former President Jacob Zuma to South Africa's ambassador to Denmark, Zinzi Mandela, have publicly blamed white South Africans for social ills in the country and have referred to the descendants of Europeans in extremely derogatory terms. Name changing. Since 1994, name changing has become commonplace in both official and private South African spheres. Often names of cities, towns and streets that are of great cultural historical significance to especially the Afrikaner community have been targeted. The ongoing battle for the name of the country's capital is a shining example. A compromise exists, namely, that the municipal name of the area, including the city, is Tshwane and the place name is Pretoria. This debate continually raises its head, however. In Pretoria, some street names were also changed amid great controversy, even up to the level of the Constitutional Court. A majority ruling was in favor of the changes, but this raised serious questions about the current interpretation of the Constitution and its implication for South African culture and heritage. In an opinion piece on the ruling, the F.W. de Klerk Foundation commented, "The judgment has other very disturbing implications. Does it mean that the history of white South Africans is nothing but a one-dimensional litany of oppression? Was there nothing since 1652 that is worthy of commemoration and celebration? What does the judgment mean for the foundational right of white South Africans to human dignity, with which their cultural and historical identities are inextricably linked? How can they be regarded as having a right to equality if their history condemns them to moral inferiority. Elsewhere, the renaming processes continue. At the University of Pretoria, even the names of student residences were changed. Most of the men's residences had Afrikaans names of trees and the ladies' residences those of flowers. But these were deemed offensive. Here, a happy compromise to accommodate multilingualism and cultural diversity while retaining tradition would have been to translate the tree and flower names into more indigenous languages. However, in the name-changing game, compromise falls victim to ideological aims and opportunities to foster mutual recognition and respect are lost. Vandalizing and relocating statues and monuments. It is a common occurrence for monuments to be vandalized in South Africa. Reasons include metal theft, treasure hunting, wanton destructiveness, and making political statements. In 2015, a spate of attacks on statues and monuments dating back to before 1994 took place. It started with students' protests at a statue of the British imperialist Cecil John Rhodes at the University of Cape Town. When the statue of Rhodes was eventually removed in response to the students' demands, the actions of the protesters were equated to that of a lynch mob. In a town called Uitenhage, the vandalism resembled the act of necklacing, a practice of extrajudicial torture and execution favored by ANC supporters during apartheid. It entails forcing a rubber tire filled with petrol around a victim's chest and arms, then setting it on fire. When the statues are symbolically necklaced, it sends a very hostile message to minority groups represented by such symbols. The vandalism of heritage resources representing contributions by minority groups points to a strong presence of intolerance towards these groups. Many of the targeted statues were erected to honor heroes of the Afrikaner community. However, even statues representing non-Afrikaners were attacked, including those of the above-mentioned Rhodes, the Portuguese poet Fernando Pessoa, Gandhi, Queen Victoria, and even a monument commemorating the contribution of horses during the Anglo-Boer War. These illustrations of intolerance correlate with many anti-minority, anti-white, and specifically anti-Afrikaner statements that are made in public by prominent ANC and EFF politicians. In response to the growing violence that went hand in hand with these acts of vandalism, Nathi Mthethwa, the Minister of Arts and Culture, appointed a task team in 2015 to investigate the transformation of heritage. When presenting the final, non-unanimous recommendations of this team to Parliament in 2008, the Minister said, "Monuments, statues and place names project the foundational values and authority of the state. They serve a legitimizing role in society, cultivating popular acceptance and consent to the authority of the state. Consent derives from identification with the state. This implies that people have to embrace the values espoused by the state. Monuments are therefore a constant public reminder of the foundational values of the state and those in power. Their role is to conscientize the public." He never mentioned the fact that monuments and statues have a historical context, simply to memorialize events and people of the past, leaving the decision on whether they were heroes or villains open for interpretation. The fact that the purpose of such heritage resources was, in his opinion, only to conscientize the public to the values of the state is quite ironic, as this was the time when the staggering extent of the state capture under President Jacob Zuma was coming to light. This illustrates how sentiments for heritage are often stirred up to deflect attention away from more pressing issues. It is worth noting that, despite the great number of instances of vandalism in 2015, no significant arrests or prosecution of vandals took place. The minister showed himself to be in favor of removing offensive statues to a theme park, ostensibly modeled on the Russian example. Many statues and symbols from the pre-1994 era have already been systematically removed from public spaces anyway. In this regard, the minister said, "Of course, removal of statues is not the end goal. It is part of an ongoing project towards transforming our society to make it humane for black people. Relocating statues of the old order simply adds impetus to our collective endeavor to realize the dream of a just and non-racial society. Thus, according to the minister, only the sentiments of one section of the South African population must be accommodated. The compromise of adding more statues and monuments without removing existing ones in order to create a more comprehensive and inclusive image of the checkered South African past seems not to be considered as an option. Many more examples of the threat facing South African heritage, and especially the heritage of minority groups like Afrikaners, can be cited. These include the underfunding of heritage resources like archives and museums, politicized historical commemorations with accompanying reinterpretation of facts, a lack of protection of heritage resources due to the dysfunctional conservation bodies, and self-imposed censorship. The ANC is failing miserably as far as nation building is concerned, as it is focused on creating a monoculture which requires South Africa's unique cultural diversity and heritage to be sacrificed for ideological purposes. Objectivity falls victim to scapegoating by attempting to distract the attention from government's mistakes and short-term political aims. This leaves South Africans despairing for the future of our past. My name is Ernst, and this is your fact sheet.